Have you ever felt the difference between being truly heard and just being tolerated? Like someone's nodding while mentally replying to a Slack message, versus that rare moment when a person locks eyes with you, puts their phone down, and you can feel them catching not just your words, but the meaning underneath them. I was at a coffee shop this week, editing podcast notes, and I overheard this conversation that hit me square in the gut. This woman was talking to her friend about being passed over for a promotion that she'd been working toward for years. And you could hear how much she cared, how much this riled her up, how much hope she'd attached to that one step forward. But her friend barely looked up, just tossed out those lazy, well-meaning phrases like, "Well, just apply somewhere else," or maybe ask for more responsibility. No real pause, no follow-up, no curiosity. And I watched this shift happen. I'm fascinated with human behavior, so I love eavesdropping. But this woman's posture just folded in on itself. Her voice got quieter, her eyes dropped to the table, and then she picked up her phone too and just scrolled, checked out. Like she'd realized that she had already been alone in that moment. Might as well do something about it. The conversation drifted to something shallow, and the moment to connect was gone. And the worst part is, I've been both of them. The one craving to be heard, and the one too uncomfortable or too distracted or too fix-it-minded to actually listen. We all think we're good at listening, but let's be real, we are not. Studies show that while 95% of people rate themselves as above average listeners, most of us remember only about 25% of what we hear. And that number tanks even further when we're stressed, multitasking, or ready to argue. And it makes sense. Our brains process words 4 times faster than people can speak them. So while someone is talking, we have this extra mental bandwidth, and most of us fill it with judgment, solutions, or planning our next line. I've caught myself doing it mid-conversation. Someone starts sharing something vulnerable, and I'm already loading up this helpful response. Or worse, my brain goes, "That reminds me of when I," and suddenly it's not about them anymore. But I've also had those rare conversations, the ones that shift something inside of you, where the other person waits and holds the silence, asks questions not to direct, but to invite, and suddenly it's like you're hearing yourself more clearly than you have in weeks. Those are the moments that change people. And not because advice was given, but because space was held. In a world that's loud and reactive and full of half listening, deep listening is a radical act. It heals, it reconnects, it reveals things that we didn't know that we knew. So what if the most powerful thing you could offer someone right now isn't your wisdom or your words, but your presence? Today, our guest is Emily Kasriel. She's a BBC journalist, executive coach, and workplace mediator. After experiencing the transformative power of really being heard, she began exploring how deep listening could bridge divides and spark change, even in the most charged conversations. So in this episode, you'll learn the surprising science behind what happens in our brains when we're truly heard, simple ways to become a better listener, even in triggering or high-stakes moments, and how space, silence, and presence can transform your most important relationships. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up, or text the word morning to 33777.
I know so often when I am super annoyed with somebody or super feel they need to change or have a kind of slightly disproportionate sense I am right, yeah, getting on the high horse of indignation, that is often about me, not them. And most often what I'm doing is projecting one of my shadows, to use a Jungian phrase, and putting it onto them. So I'm not actually listening to them. I'm listening to somebody else or a mixture of my own stuff that I project on them. And that's what's really going on. And once you can discover that, and I suggest before important conversations, just taking time yourself. Who am I really listening to when I'm listening to Mark, for example?
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
Emily, how did deep listening become part of your life story?
I have been a journalist for many, many years at the BBC. But on the side, I also became an executive coach over 10 years ago, and also a mediator, a workplace mediator. And through that experience of being coached myself, actually, before I even became a coach, I understood how somebody listening to me in that very intentional way could change not only what I shared with them, but also what I even thought. And then practicing coaching with other people really inspired me to see that they could come up with new thoughts and change their lives and imagine new possibilities that they couldn't even have thought about before. And that was truly inspiring for me.
Was there like one moment where it clicked and you're like, this is going to be my next big thing?
I was running this big season at the BBC called Crossing Divides because I wanted the whole of BBC to tell more stories of people engaging across conflict, not just the kind of standard story that journalists unfortunately so often tell of the fact that they are in conflict, because we know we're more alert to bad news stories and journalists are attracted to them because they have better pictures and they feel more dramatic and all of those sorts of things. And when I was doing that project and I had to brief 40 BBC local radio journalists who each were finding three conflicts in their own community. We're not talking about people literally fighting and killing each other, but arguing about whether or not to have a statue of Margaret Thatcher, or meat eaters arguing with vegans, or they chose their three conflicts. And when I was briefing them on how they could have more constructive and interesting engagements across divides, I came to understand that I needed more. I needed to know more. When I was briefing these local journalists, I realized I needed to know more. I needed to be able to help them create more constructive conversations. And I realized that listening was really core to being able to engage with other people, particularly when we think differently from them.
So when you pitched this idea to like, let's bring listening, let's try to merge this divide instead of strengthening the divide, how are you met? Because I think there's so much skepticism in the world and distrust. And I know that there are a lot of people who believe that the media is kind of there to intensify our divide. So to have somebody in the middle saying, let's do it the opposite way, did that even work? Is that, because even working in marketing, it's when you learn how to create headlines, it's all about, well, you got to get to that thing that really triggers them. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, kind of cringing inside and wondering, this isn't my life goal, but this is the way to get ahead. And so I imagine there's so many people kind of caught in that intersection of like, I'd love to create peace, but would that be helpful or hurtful to my business? So what did they say to you when you proposed this?
I mean, working for a public service broadcaster is kind of helpful because it is there to create positive impact, to create more understanding rather than more conflict. So that is helpful when you're working for a public service broadcaster. But I also reached out to the British Council, who does a lot of work across the world in different peace contexts. And I worked with them. And in fact, I did a partnership with the BBC and the British Council. And I decided for the BBC centenary, when it was celebrating its 100 years, that we would recruit 1,000 people in 100 countries to train in deep listening. And what is good is that there's a lot of motivations that people have to listen. It's not just to, make peace across the divide. It's also to get on better with their family, to do better at work, to learn to listen more comfortably with silence or stop interrupting. I mean, hey, ask my family. I used to be a serial interrupter, and I still do interrupt at times too. So there's a lot of motivations. People know, I think, in their hearts, a lot of people know that if only they could listen, all sorts of things become possible. They just don't know how. A lot of people really are incentivized to want to learn to listen better. And the other thing is, a lot of people think they already know how to listen. And I often ask people when I train people, and I say, give me a fingers from 1 to 5, how good a listener you are. And quite often they say 4 or 5. And then after we've done a workshop, particularly if it's more in depth over several days, they say, actually, I realized that I didn't really listen. I just thought that I knew how to listen.
I was going to ask that. Are people even aware if they're a good listener or not? What are the indicators that you might not be as good of a listener as you think you are?
I think that if you, like me, love to interrupt, I mean, interrupting is almost the opposite of allowing somebody time to think. And giving people a spacious silence, even if it might feel a bit awkward at first, is a real telltale sign of a good listener. But it's also about being able, at least temporarily, to abandon your agenda of trying to get them to change. Because so often when we listen only long enough to tell the person why they're wrong or to try and solve their problem for us. We want to help. But in doing so, we're depriving them of their agency and of their own ability to come to their own solutions, which are best for them.
I totally see that, especially in coaching. But how do you tell just the average person, you got to listen long enough for someone to come to their own conclusions? Like when you're trying to teach that to somebody, I can just hear the inner chatter of like, but what's in that for me, whether or not they realize it or not, because it's like, I just set myself up to basically be a safe space and a coach for this person. I just wanted a conversation and to get in and get out. So how do you teach people like the real benefits of that for them, even if they're not in something like a coaching container?
Well, I think there's two things. I don't think that a deep listening mindset is good for every single conversation. I mean, if I were to ask you, would you like a cup of tea? And then you were to give me 5 seconds silence and you were to really try and understand the core of what I would said, I'd probably just throw the cup of tea at you, yeah? Even if I'm British. So it's for the conversations that really matter. Conversations which we know we have a relationship to repair, a conversation where we really need to try and understand, where we feel a lot of frustration, where we know things aren't going so well, whether at home or at work or with neighbors who think differently. And we can think that there's another possibility. I think the other thing is really having the experience of yourself being deeply heard, because that for me made such a difference when I was listened to by coaches and could see that given their empathetic, accepting, unconditional, positive regard, I was able to think new thoughts that felt truly empowering. And that made me want to offer that more to other people. And then, your kids, you see what you think is the right answer, trying to sort their problems out, leaves them feeling annoyed. They don't really want to trust you. They don't want to share with you. And we all want our kids to talk to us. We know the dangers when kids don't talk to us. So there's a lot of incentives, because it is hard, this stuff at the beginning. But I think once you do it and you see the transformational impact that it can have, it is really, really exciting. And then the other thing is a piece of research, which first came out 25 years ago, which is often we think of listening as really passive. Oh, God, I've got to sit for ages listening to somebody as they talk and talk and talk. Isn't that boring? Why can't I do something more active and useful? Actually, the listener is co-creating the narrative. So depending on how you listen, the speaker will talk for longer rather than just keeping at very surface level. They'll go much deeper and have much more interesting ideas, which they may choose to share with you. So you gain a far greater understanding of their true thinking than you would otherwise if you just go through that kind of performative listening, or even worse, the kind of interrupting listening that we do so frequently.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Getting therapy used to be this weird, kind of shameful thing that people didn't really talk about. And now it's finally pretty normal, but we still have work to do. Did you know that 26% of Americans in a recent survey said that they avoid seeking mental health support because they're afraid of being judged? That is 1 in 4 people struggling alone when they don't have to. And that ripple effect is huge. When someone isn't mentally well, it touches everyone around them, their family, their workplace, their whole community. I've seen therapy transform people's lives. It's not just for crisis moments. It's for learning how to set boundaries. It's for becoming a better communicator. It's for figuring out why you keep repeating the same patterns. BetterHelp has spent over 10 years connecting people with the right therapist. They have more than 30,000 licensed therapists with all kinds of specialties. The whole thing happens online, which makes it way more affordable and convenient. What's cool is you can switch therapists anytime at no extra cost, because finding the right fit matters. We're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/mindlove to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/mindlove. Building a great team is like finding your people. The energy has to click, the values need to match, and everyone better be headed in the same direction. But finding those perfect fits, that part can suck. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Indeed stands out because they connect you with the people who won't just fill a seat, but they'll actually fit your vibe. Their sponsored jobs feature puts your post in front of candidates who get what you're trying to build. With sponsored jobs, your listing jumps to the top of the page for the right candidates. And according to Indeed data, sponsored jobs get 45% more applications than regular posts. And what's really cool is there's no monthly subscriptions, no long contracts, and you only pay for what works. Super simple, right? And you want to know something crazy? In the 1 minute we've been talking, 23 hires happened on Indeed worldwide. That's 23 teams who just found their missing piece. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. I am reminded of the concept of a mastermind. I remember reading Napoleon Hill a long time ago and understanding that when two minds come together, it's not just 1 + 1. You create exponential results. There's something about it that bounces off of each other. And so I love this idea in listening where you basically create this space. And I think a lot of us have such a materialism conception of the world where we think, well, if I'm not saying something, I'm not contributing to the conversation. But as you said, when you allow that space, you change the way that they show up. But also, I wonder what else is even happening. There's research in quantum entanglement. Maybe your brain is firing things over and actually changing what they'll say beyond just giving them space to go deeper.
I think that there's a lot of interesting things going on because there was one piece of research which put somebody in a fMRI scanner looking at their brainwaves, and they were then recorded telling a story about high school. I can't remember what it was, their high school prom or something. And then other people were recorded listening to that conversation inside the same scanner, and then asked questions about that story. And they found that people who understood the story the best, their brainwaves most similarly mirrored the brainwaves of the storyteller. But even more interestingly, the ones who understood it the very best, their brainwaves even predicted the brainwaves of the speaker. So they were so much inside the head that they kind of knew and had a sense of what the speaker was able to tell, which I find so exciting. And there's this wonderful Jewish theologian and philosopher called Martin Buber. And he distinguished between I-it relationships, which are the ones we usually have when we treat the other person as an object, somebody to extract something from, and I-thou relations, when we treat them as something, and our whole relationship as something much more magical, something much more transformative. And it's not that all relationships will be I-thou or they will be consistently I-thou. We might float in and out of an I-thou relationship over a conversation, but it is magical and empowering, and you feel your minds connecting together. And I think it is totally energizing and exciting.
Oh my gosh, there's so much I want to unpack there. One, I love what you just said about making the other person kind of the object. This is a thought experiment I do quite a bit because I realized in all of my difficult relationships, at some point I've made that other person, and the way I've described it is I've made them a caricature. It's like I see these big things that somehow trigger me, and then they just become that. They become my problem rather than seeing the wholeness of that human. And this has really been, it's been easy to just kind of brush that off with regular people in life because I have the blessing of kind of not having to stay in situations I don't need to be in, but that's not always serving me. There's different relationships like, with a mother or with your own kids sometimes where I have a very spirited 4-year-old. And so I want to make sure I'm never doing that. And even when he's having 19 meltdowns in a row, I try to really tune into my heart and say, okay, I have a feeling I know what he's going to do. And there's like a 95% chance he is going to have another meltdown right now. But can I just open to him and be curious and full of wonder that I created this magical human from nothing pretty much? Now he's forming his own ideas and he's having a more difficult time than I am. And so I see how that sort of softening of your whole nature and opening to somebody else can bring in the wholeness of who they are rather than laser focusing on the thing that bothers you or the thing that you're trying to change.
That's such a beautiful way to express it. That openness, that letting go of trying to change them, openness to who they are, and curiosity, because I think curiosity is such a fundamental part that we so often assume, especially about those who are closest to us, what's going on in their mind, what they're going to say, what their politics are. So much about them. And what's so exciting, especially about children, of course, because they change so rapidly, is often our assumptions are outdated. We don't really know what's going on. And if you can stay curious, and it's really, really tough while a kid's having or anybody's having a meltdown, and stay into a place of openness, that can be transformational. And the other thing I think is super important is about listening to yourself. I know so often when I am super annoyed with somebody or super feel they need to change or have a kind of slightly disproportionate sense, I am right, getting on the high horse of indignation, that is often about me, not them. And most often what I'm doing is projecting one of my shadows, to use a Jungian phrase, and putting it onto them. So I'm not actually listening to them. I'm listening to somebody else or a mixture of my own stuff that I project on them. And that's what's really going on. And once you can discover that, and I suggest before important conversations, just taking time yourself. Who am I really listening to when I'm listening to Mark, for example? I mean, I was talking to one of my coaching supervisor, and he said, can I just ask about your help with something? And this guy is chair of an English energy company, a regional energy company. And one of the people who's in his team is an accountant and has all this expertise. But Mark has been finding that when he was listening to him, he found him annoying. They weren't getting on. It was just a sort of ongoing tension between them. And he didn't really know what was happening. And as he started to talk to me, and as I deeply listened to him, he just suddenly went, ooh. And you felt this change, like he looked up into the distance and he suddenly realized that this accountant guy was reminding him of his big brother. And his big brother used to bully him because his parents weren't that engaged and the eldest son had left the house. And his big brother used to play with all these chemical things and Bunsen burners and doing these experiments. And he found his baby brother really annoying. And once Mark realized that this was what was going on, that's why he was so triggered by that guy, it was then possible to start to have a different, much more constructive adult relationship with him.
Ooh, projections are so powerful. And I feel like they're really difficult to get your head around. When you're first beginning personal growth, you're like, what do you mean I'm projecting onto them? No, they're just annoying me. And I feel like my life really began to shift when I think Loving What Is by Byron Katie was the thing that really got me to understand this the most because of the way she does the turnarounds. If you haven't read that book, listeners, I recommend the audiobook because there's live sessions of her working with people in that book. And it's it made me see all of my difficult relationships differently. Because when you turn it around, for example, there was a period of time where I was really stressed out with my mom because of our spiritual differences. And I was interpreting her as just being really overbearing with her religious views and something I was never going to just subscribe to. And so I was just like, why is she always wanting me to change? This is so frustrating. And then when I played with the turnarounds, why am I always wanting her to change? Was the first one. And I'm like, that's exactly what I'm doing also. How am I expecting her to accept me as I am when I'm just as frustrated by trying to change her? And so the projection work can go pretty deep, and it might be hard to say, like, I don't think I'm projecting onto somebody, but most often when you're annoyed by somebody, the only reason that you're so focused on that is because you are seeing something that's also in you.
Yeah, and something you're not comfortable with, because the stuff we don't like about ourselves, we place on other people. And for me, it's when the reaction is disproportionate. That's what I've learned to read. There's something going on. There's that sense of very black and white. I'm 100% in the right and they're 100% in the wrong. There's no nuance, no space for nuance. And when I have those sorts of feelings, I then said, whoa, 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 wait a minute, let's take some time. And you can go for a walk with one of your shadows. You can say, okay, there's something going on here. Let's have a chat about it. Go in nature where nobody thinks you're crazy. You know, nature's often such a beautiful place to help us, inspire us to have different thoughts. And, you know, allow sometimes actually even giving that shadow a voice and say, what's going on? Why are you feeling so annoyed, older brother, or me when I was 8, or whatever it was? And give voice. Let that other shadow speak out loud and listen to it with compassion. See what comes. And I should say that if people are vulnerable or experience serious trauma or even any kind of trauma, they should seek expertise help. This is not, you know, starting to go deep into stuff which might have been hidden for good reason. You do need to be watchful and careful and mindful and get the appropriate help that you might need if you do need that help.
I've experienced being my own best active listener, and I think that helped me shift in a number of ways. First, it's great practice to being an active listener, and it's almost easier to deal with your triggers, I feel like. But the other thing is, it really showed me how much I was outsourcing wisdom. Like, I always needed to find it from something else. And I'm still a book reader, a program taker, but what do you think? What do you think? And it's like, maybe I already know this. Maybe I already know more than I give myself credit for. What happens if I just tune into my own heart and give myself space with a question? Even if nothing comes for the first 5 minutes, just sit with it longer. Let things flow without judgment, whether you like what you're hearing or not, and just see what it evolves into, because maybe the first thing that comes up isn't what comes up later, and you have to kind of get through your own weeds to get to the flower.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way of expressing it, and the idea of just sitting with stuff. And I think particularly when people are coming up with, let's say they're in pain, emotional pain, they're suffering, and what we often want to do is cheer them up. You know, that's what we think our role is, to make them feel better. And instead, if we can allow them to sit with the pain, and that actually particularly applies to children, because I think so often when they say, you know, Mom, I had a horrible time at school, this teacher was just really picking on me and I felt rubbish, or garbage in America. And, you know, we attuned to say, you know, don't worry, I'm sure it wasn't so bad. I'm sure the teacher was talking to everybody. But in fact, that's not what they need. You don't have to agree with them and saying, yes, the teacher was picking on you, but we can say, sounds like that was pretty tough for you. Is that right? And check in with them. And by you actually understanding them, and not even understanding them, I would say, attempting to understand them, they feel like they matter. And they can then, if you do it enough, they can then feel comfortable themselves to be able to bring in other different contexts and different situations. I have found that absolutely to be true with my kids.
What I've noticed in adults lately is you can see, it's almost like when people are listening to each other, they're afraid if they listen, there's some sort of threat there. Like, political views, for example. Two people have different political views and they're afraid of even letting the other person speak. Like this moment of them speaking their beliefs is going to somehow give more power to the other side.
Yeah.
So how do we get around that when both sides are feeling threatened that I can't even let them say this because it'll give life to this idea?
Yeah, I think you're completely right. People worry that by giving another perspective airtime, it will validate it. And not only that, it will be contaminating. And somehow they'll be tarnished with these evil, abhorrent ideas that they think are beyond the pale. But what I find when I work with people, and I often get them to practice with a very light, more comfortable subject with each other. And I have worked with a very diverse group of people because, like, when we recruited 1,000 people in 100 countries, the top 4 countries represented were UK, New Zealand, Malaysia, and Iran. A friend of mine runs the BBC Persian service, so we were able by Telegram to recruit a lot of Iranians. These were all English speakers, but it was a very diverse group. And people started to become comfortable with the very notion of listening across difference, even when they were discussing a very comfortable subject, which then gave them confidence to start to become more comfortable when they talked about more contentious issues. And what's really exciting, because I thought I'm not doing a project to that scale without seeing if it actually worked. So I reached out with academics, and a paper has just been published in that well-known bedtime read, the Journal of Applied Social Psychology, but peer-reviewed journal, which showed that even when they discussed such difficult topics, the trained group, rather than the control group, were able to be more open and able to reconsider their own attitudes. And you talked earlier about why should we listen to other people when they think differently? But actually, research evidences that when people feel truly heard, they dial down what's called their attitude extremity. They stop feeling so angry or so strong about an issue, often because they don't feel so defensive. And so they become more open to the notion that there's more than one perspective. And that's really exciting.
How do you help people to get to that point of even calming their nervous system enough to listen? It just feels like we've all let it go for so long that people are just reactive. And I know for me, that's taken a lot of inner work to get to that point, and I'm still triggered. And so when you're teaching this to somebody for the first time or working with them, how do you help them to stay curious when what someone's saying goes against everything you feel like you believe?
Well, first of all, I do like a little meditation. So I ask people at the beginning, and that also sometimes calms me down. If I'm feeling a little nervous, I always note that I'm much more calm. And we can do a little one now if you'd like.
Yeah.
And so I ask people to uncross their legs if they're crossed and to feel their feet touching the earth and to notice their shoulders if they're clenched or relaxed and their jaw. And to start to become aware of their breath, of the air entering the lungs and the air leaving their lungs. And the quality of every breath. Every breath is unique. Every breath has a slightly different temperature and texture. And they may notice that their mind wanders. That's what our mind does. And notice if you're judging yourself for having a wandering mind. And let that go too. And bring your attention back to your breath. I'd like you now to imagine a time that you were listened to really well. What was that person doing that made you feel so heard? And what does it feel like to really be heard? And when you feel comfortable, I'd like to invite you to open your eyes.
Thank you. Wasn't expecting a mini meditation, but every time it happens, I know I needed it.
Well, I feel, I mean, you can hear in my voice that I'm much more calmed down as well. And when we're able to listen in that kind of spacious sense, it it enables us to be more aware of ourselves and therefore be in a place to be more aware of what's going on with the other person. And even there was a guy called Theodor Reich, who was a pupil of Freud, and he coined a term which I really like called the third ear. So it's like we don't just listen with our ears on the side of our face. I think of the third ear, and I drew a picture of it because I've also illustrated my book. A third ear as being somewhere near your heart. And it's like you listen with your unconscious to the other person's unconscious to really sense what's going on for them.
I had a memory come up when you asked of a time that I was deeply listened to. And it was not super long ago, but it was a combination of both things we've talked about, of listening to myself first. And I was doing a meditation. And it was just a time, my husband and I are both entrepreneurs. And there's been a lot of different times in this journey where we're figuring things out, or money is tight, or we're kind of looking at the other one. Maybe we should just do mine, or maybe we should just do yours, whatever it is. And there have been a lot of conversations that have come up over the years, especially right after I had babies, where my husband has more of an agency and he has a lot of people working for him. And he's been told by many people he's sitting on a gold mine, and we've grown that really well. And then I was kind of coming out of maternity time and going back into my business, and there was conversations about how if we both just focused on his business, it could probably grow a lot faster. And for some reason, that felt almost hurtful to me. And I couldn't figure out why, because I was like, we're a family. And so I went into a meditation, and I had these memories of my dad pop in and him coming over with entrepreneur. Long story short, I realized I had always gotten the message that my dad was irresponsible, that he didn't stick with things. And it was something I took on after he died. And they were some of the beliefs I had to work with. And I just realized, like, I was having this moment in a meditation where I was telling my dad I was doing this for him. And I realized how important it is to me to create my own success, to pick up where he left off, and to kind of see, I feel the tears coming up even talking about it now, of like, I'm going to do this for us, especially because he had such a hard childhood. And I told this to my husband, and I saw him listen. I could see his demeanor shift. And he reflected back to me. He's like, you've never said that to me before. And I totally understand. And it's never really come up again in that way. It's just, how can we support each other? And that's just one of those moments where I was so appreciative of him giving me that space and myself giving me that space, because it created this, I just realized an internal driver that I hadn't seen. And I needed to give that, and so did he, for me to come to that. And so I was just really grateful for our relationship, just so that I could even understand myself more deeply.
So I'm hearing you say that because of the beautiful space that you created for yourself, and then feeling open to be vulnerable with your husband, you were able to share something which previously had almost been something which was negative, a frustration, you didn't know where it came from. And when you realized it was because of your father and his, not able to fulfill himself and the risk taking, but could actually be a positive driver, and sharing that and feeling understood by your husband was something really opening and magical for you. Is that right?
Yeah. And it helped me embody that motivation instead of having this slight internal resistance, as you said, where it was almost this negative thing that I wasn't fully aware of. And then all of a sudden it was like, this is for you. And now it's like, I feel him coming with me on the journey, and I can just do it proudly. And I'm on the same page with my husband. So there were many shifts just from this one kind of moment of listening.
Yeah, it sounds really beautiful, and you can hear the change of energy in your voice as you're talking about this, and things which had been intentioned suddenly became aligned. And not only in terms of your shifts, but also having your father and your husband together. I mean, your father's no longer alive, but together working towards a shared goal made you feel much more congruent. Like together, there isn't that sense of tension, but instead driving in the same direction. Is that right?
Yeah. And I almost have this like energetic feeling of like these strong men, both my husband who's alive and my dad's that's right behind me, like pushing me towards my goal. So yeah, it was a really perspective shifting time, and it just changed the way I saw myself and my place in this world and my place in my business and my place in my family. So yeah, listening is transformative.
Wow, that sounds a really impactful moment for you. Um, that sounds very beautiful.
It's easy for me to get to those moments with my husband because we trust each other so deeply. I think we do listen to each other really well. We're both on this growth path. And I know that even when he triggers me, like I recognize that my triggers are my responsibility. I think we both recognize that. So even if I don't react as such at first, he knows I'll come to that. I know he'll come to that. And so it's a lot easier to come to the table because we know, like, even if it doesn't go well, we will kind of realize the truth of the situation quickly. But I found it's really difficult. It's a lot more difficult to do when you trust that you're doing the work, but you don't necessarily trust that the other person is doing the work. And so you're the only one on the side being like, am I projecting? Am I triggered? That's my responsibility, blah, blah, blah. And then the other person's there potentially blaming, potentially thinking just not having the deeper awareness of the surface level moment.
Yeah, and that does happen, and that is challenging. And I would say if you're in a relationship with somebody and you're always doing the listening, you might need time and carve out time at the beginning and saying, wait a minute, I really want to listen to you, but I also really want to share my perspective. And that's okay. But I would say, having some magical encounters with strangers. I was in the pharmacy the other day picking up some drugs for my daughter, and I was having to give her age in. And there was a lady who was just sitting down behind me waiting for her prescription. And I was asked the age of my daughter. And I said she was born in 2000. She was born in 2021, I said. And then they said, oh, are you sure she needs this drug? And then I said, no, sorry, I'm confused. It was 2001. I got it completely wrong. Yeah, like 20 years out of date. And the woman behind me just started laughing. Said, how can you not know the age of your daughter? That's kind of crazy. And I said, yeah, you're quite right. And we were having a laugh about age. And then the woman suddenly said, I find age so hard because I have a grandmother who's, really old and she's in her 90s. And that sounds fantastic. And I go, wow, that sounds really meaningful for you. And she said, yeah, but it's so awful because I think that she's going to outlive me. And so for her, age had become this big burden because I suspect she had some chronic condition or some disease or something. And she saw that she might not live, she might die first as the grandchild rather than as the grandmother. And we just had this moment of me kind of saying that sounds like it must be really tough for you. And she said, yeah. And she started crying. And we talked for a little more. And then she said, oh, yeah, I'm so sorry for crying. I said, no, that's okay. Don't worry. And being able to just give that moment of listening to a stranger and acknowledging and accepting their worries and their grief felt really magical for me to be able to hold her in that space and be okay with her suffering. And an unexpected opportunity. And that can feel really, really magical.
I'm reminded of, it's almost like an auditory Reiki. Because when you think about what Reiki is, you're hovering your hands and you're intending for energy shifts, basically. And so it's, for the people who think it's BS, they probably have a very materialist, their worldview is probably materialism. Mine is more around the energy of things. And so the idea that you can just hold your hands and direct energy and sort of you are like thinking about the clearing, that's sort of what listening is. You're expanding and you're creating your energy, which is the reflection back of like, I'm going to be open. I want to guide to whatever needs to be said. And then you're allowing that other person's energy to kind of move through you, bounce off of you, intending to see the person and inviting the person. All of those are the energetic invitations of deep listening. And which is why I'm seeing so often it almost triggers that higher self or like the divine speaking through them. It allows them to come to a higher conclusion because there's somebody that's willing to intend and allow just next to them.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. It is that intention. It is about you giving your whole self. And it doesn't mean suffering with them. And I think that's really important. That's what a lot of people fear when difficult stuff comes up. But it's not about suffering with them, but it's about holding the space and you being attentional by giving your attention, your full attention, your compassionate attention. And it does not mean agreeing, because I think once people feel free, and for me, that's that real aha moment, that they're not contaminated, that they're not signaling agreement. And I know that younger people in particular fear listening means it signals agreement, which is interesting. But once they realize it doesn't, and you can hold these ideas or pain or promising you thoughts, and allowing the person to think new thoughts, that feels fantastic. And what's so important is that in so many conversations, and especially as a journalist, you've got the steering wheel. You follow up with great questions. I mean, I might have asked you all sorts of questions about your father. And I had also, when you were talking and I was listening to you just then, I had so many questions. But if I had asked you questions I wanted to know more about, I would have taken the steering wheel and gone down my path and not given you the time to reflect more deeply on what was clearly a really transformative experience for you. So it is an act of generosity, but it's an act of generosity which is also intensely fulfilling and meaningful for the speaker, is it also intensely meaningful for the listener?
I know one of the things that you talk about in your book is the difference between empathy and emotional hijacking. And so how can you tell the difference of when would it be an appropriate time to offer an insight? Or is that the trick, to ask if you can? But even in that way, if somebody's kind of in their moment and you do it at the wrong time, they might say yes when they could have really benefited from that deeper moment of silence.
Summer's here, and Nordstrom has everything you need for your best dress season ever. From beach days and weddings to weekend getaways and your everyday wardrobe. Discover stylish options under $100 from tons of your favorite brands like Mango, Skims, Princess Polly, and Madewell. It's easy too, with free shipping and free returns, in-store order pickup, and more. Shop today in stores, online at Nordstrom.com, or download the Nordstrom app.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Knowing you could be saving money for the things you really want is a great feeling. Talk to a State Farm agent today to learn how you can choose to bundle and save with the Personal Price Plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
I would say space and silence are fantastic. And many people really fear silence. They fear an awkward silence. They fear the silence will be misinterpreted. In fact, if people are depressed, silence can be more often misinterpreted as being somebody holding back. But if you in your heart are holding that empathetic, unconditional, positive regard, people will feel it in every pore of their body, it coming out at them. And I think I would suggest that people get comfortable, first of all, with 2-3 seconds of silence and see about them expanding that. You know about that type of companionable silence when you go for a walk with somebody and there's no need to speak because you're just holding them. So my suggestion, if you have that sort of insight, you keep it in your mind and you wait and you feel like what's going on with the speaker. Because when I'm coaching somebody, they'll often put their eyes top right and they'll go on this journey in their walk. And because I'm holding them, they will have those richer thoughts. And then they'll come back, and it's called the gaze window when they return to look at you again. But because you have been there for them, their journey will have been so much richer. And then you can offer that insight, but you offer it tentatively, as I write about in my book. It's like you're borrowing on finery and you're not quite sure if it fits. So you can say, I'm getting a sense that for you, there used to be a contradiction between the kind of life force of your father and your husband, and now there was a kind of coming together. Is that right? And then it's up to you to say, yeah, and you know you haven't really got it, or to say yes, or to say yes and. Because when I was doing that little bit of reflection back to you, I was trying to reflect back what you were saying, but I was also reflecting back the notes between the words, and I was just trusting myself. I didn't take notes, and that takes practice, trusting myself to really sense what was going on for you and including those emotions. And what you often did is you went yes and you went somewhere else, you went deeper in various iterations, and that's what's so exciting.
That's beautiful, because that reflection you just did about what I was talking about just sent me. I'm like, you're right. I think that is what I was experiencing. So thank you for that. I have found that when we're suddenly trying to do something that we normally just autopilot through, all of a sudden things feel awkward that wouldn't otherwise. For example, in public speaking, there's actually trainings around what to do with your hands. And suddenly you're like, what have I been doing with my hands my whole life? Why does it feel like they're so awkward right now? Like, what? Just because I'm on a stage, I don't know what to do with them anymore. And so with deep listening, there's similarities in that. And so I find when I give people something to focus on, anything to focus on, they can at least do it more naturally. Like, lean in, focus on your heart space, nodding. What are the things that you recommend while the person is getting used to those moments of silence?
Is some people, like I in the book, I interview Mariana Iskander, who runs Wikipedia, the foundation that runs Wikipedia. And what she does in meetings, and she has a glass of water and she'll just slowly take a sip, and she finds that as a way to deal with silence and to feel less awkward. Smiling can help. There's a lot of research around smiling, as long as it's smiling with the eyes as well, not a fake performative smile. And just allowing yourself to be in the moment, allowing all of those non-verbal communication to happen between both of you, and being aware of that and aware of what's going on for yourself. And in the silence is also a time to sort of process what they have just said and make sense of it. And you might choose to share that with your speaker and just say to them, I'm practicing being more comfortable with silence. Is that okay with you? If you feel you need to do that.
What's something that a speaker might feel before they realize that they've been truly heard?
I think it is those new thoughts. It's a feeling in their heart, but it's also something in their mind that goes when they're having a new thought, when they're expanding the horizons of what is possible or what they had thought made sense. And those moments are so precious and so valuable and so special. And as a listener, you learn to become aware of when that's happening, and it feels amazing.
What I love about little experiments like this, and by experiments, I mean ways of being that we should all be embodying, but for some reason they're just experiences because we are in such a fast-paced world. But I love behavioral science because it makes these everyday moments something to practice. And what I've realized is that things become really mundane if there's not something that I'm leaning into and trying to expand about myself. For example, I snowboard with my husband, and there was a period of time where when I was first getting to know him, I was really interested in becoming better. So I was going to little camps and practicing jumps. And then there was a period of time where I had kids and I couldn't go that long. And so I'd just go and be going down the mountain, and I didn't love it quite as much. And then I got comfortable enough where I'm like, I should start trying jumps again and you know, like riding switch and all of these things. And I got my spark back. And I feel like the same thing can happen in relationships, especially the ones that become commonplace, mundane. You feel like the conversations are surface level. And those are the times when we end up wanting to change the other person the most, because we have this desire for change, I think. But if we can shift our focus to say, how can I practice something new? How can I get better at listening? Even something as radical as, I wonder if there's anything in this conversation that can change me. Then we show up differently and with more presence to common moments, and we open ourselves up to something that we might have missed otherwise.
Yeah, that's such a fantastic question to ask yourself. What can I learn new? Or you might suggest to yourself, let me look out for something that might surprise me. Because what we're trying to do is get out of our, I'm just doing the standard snowboarding experience. We're trying to lift ourselves into something more profound, more interesting, more exciting, and also a little bit risky. Because I think opening yourselves up to having a different conversation can make us feel vulnerable, because who knows how we might be changed. And many of us are a little reluctant to have that level of change. So it's much safer to continue on predictable paths and having those very scripted conversations, like you get home and you say to your partner or your husband or wife, say, how was your day? Oh, it was fine, good. And then you complain about all the usual things you complain about. But when you can say, how was your day? Yeah, okay. And you say, it sounded like it didn't go quite as well. Is that right? And you suddenly are having a real conversation rather than just a performative scripted thing. And then all sorts of things are possible.
My line that I've used recently is, am I sensing that there's something under that? And it's been really fun because I feel like there's a lot of times where, I end up in the mom circles, and just because of my nature, I'm like trying to bring people too deep. And again, I'm realizing, that's my agenda. It's what I want from this. But that one is so great because I've found I can use it in anywhere. And it's never like, okay, what's she trying to do here? We're talking about toddler snacks and she's talking about existentialism.
Yeah, but that's a lovely one. It's a lovely one because I hadn't thought of that one before. Am I sensing there's something else going on here? Because it allows them to say, no, I just really hate what's it brand or whatever it is, or to say, yeah, maybe there is. And sometimes it's like an invitation, because in a way, that's what deep listening is. It's an invitation for the person to choose to go more deeply or to share or not to do so, because it's not about our control. And as you said rightly, it's not about your own agenda. It's an invitation and offering them that space. And it's interesting. I talked to Nicholas Christakis, who's a really interesting psychologist at Yale. And he's done research on social contagion. So if I'm smoking and you're a mate of mine, you're more likely to smoke too. But it's also true for really positive attributes like generosity. If I'm more generous to you, you're more likely to be generous to the people around you. And although he's not researched deep listening, he thought that deep listening would most likely follow the same trajectory, so that when you feel truly heard, you want to offer it to the people in your network and they to others. And that, especially at this time in the US, feels like such a wonderful opportunity for people to really listen, particularly across divides, particularly to strangers, particularly to people who are maybe vulnerable and alone.
This conversation is so perfect. My word of the year is resonance. And I launched a new program that I didn't even realize how closely was. It just feels like I unraveled this. The inspiration came so beautifully, but I am teaching people how to tell their stories in a way that makes people lean in and creates that resonance. So where to bring the motion, where to leave the space. And so it's so perfect the way that this is bringing that together, because my theory, that is also backed up by plenty of studies, is we're more connected than we believe that we are. I believe in oneness, that everything is one. And deep listening is this way that we can actually return to the awareness that we're not as separate as we think. And if you think about every time that you're in a triggering conversation, what happens? You become, all of a sudden, you can't see your periphery. You're like super narrow focused. You're only thinking on that one thing. The person becomes a caricature. You lose the depth of everything, from the moment to the person to yourself. And one of the ways that I've done that, even in arguments or anger, is it's just softening some of those physical things before you get into the mindset shift. It's like, okay, can I see my periphery? Okay, all of a sudden I already feel softened. Can I tune into my heart instead of my head? I feel a little bit more softened. But all of it to say is that we're coming to this point of opening and realizing that we aren't separate people. And if we can just focus on the unity between one another instead of the separation of ideas, of space, how could we shift more than just the moment and possibly the trajectory of the planet?
I think that's so fantastic. And I spent time with First Nation Canadians, and they have a long tradition of believing in this connection. And what's so super cool, it's not only a connection between me and you present in the moment, it's also a connection with the earth, with the wind, with the soil, and with our ancestors. So they believe when they were listening to me, and it really did feel like this, by the way, being listened to by them, it wasn't just them listening, it was all their ancestors too. And not only their ancestors, but their future progeny. There's a kind of continuum between the past and the present and the future and the soil and the earth and the sky. And that sense of being comfortable with whatever will unfold feels truly magical for the speaker.
I once read that in mystical traditions, silence is considered the language of the soul. And sound itself can be considered creation if you think of even the origins of the words. Logos, Om, the word, it all comes back to kind of speaking into existence. And so deep listening isn't just about giving somebody space for their rampant ideas to take life and change the world, but it's a form of energetic creation because, as you said, the listener plays a part in what comes out just by our own intentions. And so thank you so much for just bringing this research in the way that you did, because I've done different episodes on listening, but this one just had a richness to it. And I imagine that it's because of who you are and the intention that you have brought to your work.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa. It's so delightful to have this conversation with you. And I'm really excited about all the listeners to your podcast and what they're going to do in the world, having got a sense of these ideas and perhaps reading the book and sharing it with other people. And it feels that we can really make a difference in the world. And that feels exciting.
So if you were to leave listeners with one thing to either think about or practice this week, what would that be to bring this into their reality?
I think that they would consider one relationship they have when conversations tend to flow into a quite predictable sort of script, and they feel that they want to transform that relationship. And for them to really practice being curious and giving space and silence.
And one follow-up question for that, because I have struggled with this when I've practiced it, is sometimes there's an idea that we already know what they're going to say. Like, it's like, I don't want to be curious about this because I feel like I've already researched it, or I've already gone there and I've already convinced myself it's not true. One last tip from you while I have you for those situations.
To be open to be surprised, because we so often assume, but what we want to be looking out for is something new. We want to change the focus because so often we just wait for them to say what we think they're going to say. But if we give them the expansive space, we can be open to something new that we can learn about them.
And for listeners who want to go even deeper into this topic and read your book, Deep Listening, where can they find it and connect with you?
Well, they can find the book on any bookstore, on Amazon, or any local bookstore. It's HarperCollins are publishing it, so it's available everywhere, which is fantastic. And there's more information about deep listening and other articles I've written on my website, emilykasriel.com. And they can also follow me on LinkedIn.
Links from this episode will be at mindlove.com/401. Your challenge from this week is to choose one conversation. Just one, and practice holding space in a new way. That means no interrupting, no jumping to advice, no, that reminds me of. Just breathe, soften. Listen like you might actually hear something you didn't expect. You might be surprised by what happens when you do, because the truth is, not everyone is doing the work. Not everyone's sitting around trying to open up, lean in, or shift perspective. But you can be the one who creates resonance anyways. And if you've been loving this conversation around listening and resonance, that is exactly what I teach in Story Love, but on the flip side. Most people think that telling their story is about what they say, but it's actually about what people feel. Emotional resonance is what makes people lean in and stay with you and see themselves in your story, even if they're not trying, even if they're not doing the work to show up in that way. So in the same way that you can create space for someone else's truth, you can shape your own story in a way that opens people up, even if they're not consciously trying to be moved. And that's the magic of communication that resonates. So give it a try. Let me know how it goes. And if you want to know more about Story Love, reach out to me at mindlovemelissa on Instagram. You can find all of my amazing sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And if you want to keep expanding your mind every day, sign up for the Morning Mind Love at mindlove.com or text the word morning to 33777. Thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.